So some of you might be already aware of some of the guidelines in the law around PREVENT, but I thought it would be helpful to talk a little bit about that today as well. PREVENT as a government strategy has actually existed since 2006, and it continues to operate in a context of deeply embedded Islamophobia, both domestically and internationally. Some of you will be aware that hate crimes against Muslims in London rose by 70% in 2015, and in October last year, research was published that Muslim men are 76% less likely to be employed than their Christian counterparts. So clearly the way in which PREVENT is operating by now creating a statutory duty, which effectively makes it mandatory for every public servant to racially profile and spy on members of the public in a supposed effort to spot the terrorist. A false divide of us versus them is further entrenched, whereby every Muslim is a potential suspect. And of course it is important to note the unfair particular targeting of Muslims in our communities, but the implications for all of us who engage in political activity or express an opinion on domestic or international foreign policies, it's very significant because PREVENT also facilitates an obsession with so-called domestic extremists, and is very much part of the mass surveillance of political dissent, particularly within our universities and our student unions. So PREVENT is part of a broader UK counter-terrorism strategy known as CONTEST. CONTEST has 4 elements. The first, pursue, to stop terrorist attacks. The second, prevent, to stop people becoming terrorists or supporting terrorism. And the third, protect, to strengthen our protection against a terrorist attack. And the final one, prepare, to mitigate the impact of a supposed terrorist attack. The Counter-Terrorism and the Security Act 2015 contains the PREVENT statutory duty. Section 26, subsection 1, provides that authorities listed in Schedule 6 must, in the exercise of its function, have due regard to the need to prevent people from being drawn into terrorism. In broad terms, it's state authorities, governing bodies, or services within, for example, your school or your university, which must comply with this. Section 31 of that same legislation provides that further and higher education bodies must, quote, have particular regard to the duty to ensure freedom of speech and the importance of academic freedom when carrying out that duty. The Secretary of State must in turn have particular regard to the duty to ensure freedom of speech and the importance of academic freedom when issuing guidance under Section 29 and making directions under Section 30. The duty to ensure the freedom of speech means the duty imposed by the Education Act. And academic freedom has the same meaning as in the Education Reform Act. There's a real issue, actually, as to whether the PREVENT duty, as set out in this guidance, is consistent with this duty to ensure freedom of speech. The duty on universities to ensure freedom of speech is contained in the Education Act. It provides that universities must ensure, so far as reasonably practical, and that use of any premises of the establishment is not denied to any individual or body of persons on any ground connected with A, the beliefs or views of that individual, or any of the member of that body, or the policy or objectives of that body. While the PREVENT guidance for further education institutions, as I've set out, does refer to the need to balance the PREVENT duty with ensuring freedom of speech, it's difficult to see how this can really be done. Our schools and our colleges and universities must be maintained as places of open learning, where students can raise ideas and analysis of how they may wish to change the world around them. And ultimately, what the PREVENT programme does is similar to the impact of Section 28. Teachers will steer clear of discussing important topics which particularly affect their students, and in the fear that they'll compromise their students or worse, themselves. Now, student unions do not have a statutory duty to prevent people from being drawn into terrorism under PREVENT. However, the Charity Commission has guidance which is frequently used to compel our student unions not to support certain motions, host events or speakers. This is because a majority of our student unions are now listed as charities and are therefore subject to regulation by the Charity Commission. And so I thought it would be a little bit helpful to talk about the Charity Commission guidance, because it states charities, quote, must not promote or support extremist views or activity that promotes terrorism or terrorist ideology through the charity's work. It continues, charities must not engage in activities which would lead a reasonable member of the public to conclude the charity supports terrorism. It provides that if any of a charity's activities may, quote, appear to support, condone or encourage terrorist activity and terrorist ideology, the Commission expects the charity's trustees to take immediate steps to deal with this. If a speaker or literature content gives the impression that the charity supports or condones terrorist activity or violence, then the charity must make clear those are not the charity's views and it does not condone or support these views. And yet the definition of terrorism has incredible breadth, and there's a lot of case law in it. Essentially, it includes lawful journalism or acts of violence against oppressive regimes. So that charities, which include student unions, are told they cannot host speakers who support this interpretation of terrorism. And I think that's pretty problematic. The guidance also appears to cover any violence, wherever in the world, and even if it's in self-defense and therefore actually lawful in international law. The guidance provides, quote, charities, again, this includes student unions who've listed themselves as such, will be in breach of charity law where they promote extremist views and use radicalising materials. And that, quote, the views or activities which are violent or which encourage violence cannot be for the public benefit because they are illegal. So clearly this is a misdirection in law, because violence that constitutes self-defense in international law can be lawful. But as it stands, this is how our student unions' activities are being regulated. It also provides that charities must not promote or support extremist views, and trustees must ensure the charity's activities do not promote violence. It states that a charity must not provide funding or organisations that expose beneficiaries to extremist views and which directly or indirectly promotes terrorism, and should not give a platform to speakers who supposedly express extremist views. The Charity Commission guidance explains if anyone is concerned that a charity is promoting extremist views, they should report it to the Commission. The Commission then can take regulatory action, and that kind of action can include freezing bank accounts, suspending or removing trustees, and as many of you might know, trustees in a student union can include the people you've elected into sabbatical positions. So the Charity Commission's guidance goes even further than prevent, and that's provided directly by the Secretary of State. So what essentially happens is the guidance prohibits student unions from appearing to condone any terrorist activity or terrorist ideology, or permits speakers who supposedly condone terrorist activity or violence. It prohibits charities from promoting supposed extremist views or violent views, or which makes claims to which violence is subsequently presented as the only solution. And yet student unions have a long history in the UK. They play an important role in organising social and political activities which benefit its members, providing support on a range of academic and welfare issues, and representing students, both individually and collectively, campaigning on local and national issues. So how is this going to impact on the student unions organising activities and academic debates? Imagine your student union wants to host a debate about whether violence can be lawful against apartheid South Africa, apartheid Israel, or against Assad at the beginning of the Syrian revolution, or even about whether violence currently used by Kurdish groups, supported by the West against Islamic State. And you have some speakers who suggest violence may be justified. They could be regarded as promoting violence or terrorism. And so even where a group using violence for political ends is supported by a Western government or is acting against an oppressive regime, does not prevent it being terrorism. And according to the Charity Commission guidance, promotion of violence, which is not terrorism, and could constitute a lawful self-defence in international law, appears to be prohibited. Of course, there may be legal challenges here, but one of the reasons why I think it's important to talk about today is because I think actually any fight against prevent also has to be one in which we raise the issue of the Charity Commission and the Charity Commission guidance. Because if we look at some of the propaganda that's been fed by the Daily Mail and friends about charities, like Cage, Kids Company and Age Concern, how it's been used to make hysterical calls for the government to have even tighter controls on charities, and therefore the levels of powers that are next going to be given to the Charity Commission I think are quite significant.